Just with comments.
I think they already said.
Okay, I'm gonna call this March 3rd meeting of the Bellevue Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Start time 5:31. We'll start with roll call.
Ready, Commissioner Lindbergh,
Here.
Commissioner Hughley. Here. Commissioner Blazer.
Here.
Commissioners Kurtz and Grunfeld are absent.
Okay, we'll start with the notice of agenda compliance, finding that this regular meeting was posted in accordance with Idaho code by February 27th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
I move the notice for the March 3rd, 2025 regular meeting was completed in accordance with Idaho Code Section 74-204.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, so we'll start with, on our agenda, a call for conflict. Does anyone have a conflict on today's agenda?
No.
Nope.
No conflicts. Okay, next we'll start with public comments, for items that are not on today's agenda. If you're on, Zoom, if you just wanna raise your hand. Maybe here. Everyone wants to talk about the good stuff. Okay, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. We just have a couple meetings, minutes from meetings from the last two meetings to review, and I'll take motions on approval if we have no changes.
I move to approve the minutes for February 3rd and February 18th.
I will second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. So that's the end of the consent agenda. We'll move on to the public hearing for tonight regarding the application from Judy and Keith Myers.
Listen, I can't hear.
Okay, we start with this. First of all, this is a continuation of our prior meeting. So we have some follow-ups from city and from the applicant, I believe. Whoever would like to start.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I can start. My name is Samantha Stolnecker with Opal Engineering on behalf of the applicant here tonight. So at the end of the last meeting, the two pieces of feedback, or three pieces of feedback that we received were, one, can we get some information about kind of what the existing site looks like? So Brian and I met on site with Keith and did a walkthrough. We took a lot of photos and we tried to document them so you guys could clearly see kind of where those photos were taken, which direction, and what we were looking at. So hopefully that was helpful, and we can answer any questions you have as you go through those if you're looking at a specific location. The second item that the P&Z wanted to kind of get some more information about was whether or not it was possible to simply relocate the power lines. And I did reach out to Idaho Power, and I had a really good conversation with their transmission line designer. He sent over a little bit of information regarding what it would cost if we could relocate those. And he gave me a ballpark cost of somewhere between $100,000 to $200,000 to shift those lines over 5 feet. So we would be erecting new poles and then rerunning those wires to those new poles.
And that's 5 feet to the east.
To the east. However, I think that the second part of that email that is critical is relative to the setbacks that are required from those transmission lines. And given the existing poles proximity to the neighboring properties to the east, those lines are already encumbering the western portion of those lots. So if we shift the lines further east, it further encumbers the developability of those lots on the east side of the alley. So I would, I guess I would feel uncomfortable encumbering those properties and prohibiting their ability to develop in the future, to shift those lines over. So that's the feedback that we received from Idaho Power. And then the third item was that we wanted to get a little bit more information about the shed that's existing on the north side of the alley. I did have a good conversation with the property owner. That shed is kind of tied to. Brian and I looked at it with Keith on site. that shed is not able to be relocated, based on what we saw, there really isn't structure that we think could allow a relocation. And unfortunately, there's not a location on the neighboring property that would allow for it to be relocated either. So I think that the likely path forward for that shed is just demolition. And I know that the neighbor is here, so during public comment, I'm hoping that she'll be able to make a comment about that as well. So those are the three items that we had direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission on. Hopefully that was enough information. And at this point, really, the applicant is looking for some direction about, well, hopefully you all can make a recommendation to city council tonight, on the requested waivers, because now we have enough information relative to the transmission lines. I'm happy to discuss the road section again in detail if you would like. But we're really looking for some direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission and hopefully a recommendation for city council for this plat amendment.
Does anyone have any questions, for the applicant?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I am being redundant and asking this question, but just looking at this and some of the feedback that Dalton had given you in the previous email, the NESC code sections 23 or 231B1, he was saying that non-curved streets, that there's not like strict codes surrounding clearance. And so I'm curious, do the poles have to be moved to meet the city's standards? As it looks like they would be right on the edge of asphalt.
Yeah, the poles would be right on the edge of asphalt. I personally feel like there should be 5 feet of clearance in order for those streets to operate safely.
From the edge of asphalt.
I don't believe that there's a standard, but there's certainly guidance that suggests that there's additional separation that's required.
Yeah, for sure.
Are the poles currently on the east, was that block 24, are they currently on those property lines?
No, the poles are in the alley. They're roughly. Let's see if I have a dimension, I apologize. They're about 11 feet,
Yeah.
roughly 11 and a half feet to the center of pole to the property line. And then the lines extend kind of out from the poles.
Mhm.
Ryan, do you have another copy of the additional material? Took almost spare binders. Well, I took my binder. Didn't bring it back.
Yes.
If we don't have other questions for the applicant, Brian, did you have items to add?
I don't have a whole lot to add. As the applicant stated, we had a site visit, took a bunch of photos. I also requested they add or include, this preliminary plat overlaid on aerial. I think is kind of helpful to kind of get a sense of, it identifies where the power poles are. The fisherman's access easement, the area. And then, yeah, the applicant stated the, Idaho Power investment.
Would you mind stop unmuting yourself? There's just a lot of feedback. Oh, bye.
So, and then as the applicant stated, that would reduce development potential on the adjoining properties, just because we currently have 0 foot setback, but there would be no requirement, for distance from above ground power lines to that. Realistically, that's probably where parking is gonna parking, landscaping, that sort of stuff is gonna go. Landscaping is gonna be a challenge, as long as the power lines are above ground, no matter where they are in relation to property lines. As far as, trees and that sort of thing go, you can have low, shrubs and that sort of thing. But I think that it's tall enough to reach power poles. Then, yeah, shed relocation, I would agree with the assessment that it is most likely not on a foundation, doesn't seem to have any floor to it. Any attempt to relocate it would probably destroy it. Pretty much.
Is this that most recent?
It's the same plat you've been looking at,
Okay.
it's just on an aerial.
Yeah. Is now a good time then to do public comment
Yep.
before we, okay.
If you, unless you have any questions.
Okay, yeah, does anyone have questions right now for Brian?
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll open this meeting up to public comment now for this item that is on the agenda. If you just wanna raise your hand if you're on Zoom, and we'll, and then anyone who is on public comment, just state your name and your address for the record. Is anyone here tonight? Yes.
Hi, I'm Mike Howard. I'm on Riverside. And got some thoughts. If we look at starting with the proposed 1A, the new lot
Mhm.
down below. I think it's interesting how at this current proposal, this seems to be landlocked as it is proposed. And so, you know, I think a minor concern would be, all right, well, first of all, you know, I'm a big proponent of property rights, and Mr. Myers, and with all due respect, you know, that was my family's, the Howard Preserve, and so, you know, I can remember historically, my father, he wanted to develop that whole Howard Preserve. And I get it, you know, but there was a lot of issues, and so, you know, what we ended up doing was really an amazing thing, that we were able to work with the city of Bellevue, the Woodard Land Trust, interested parties in the community, which ended up with what the city currently has, which is called the Howard Preserve. And we worked with Mr. Myers before over the years, so we thought that was what we'd call a win-win deal. But as it looks with 1A, it's interesting how that's positioned now, where I believe, the concern would be, if that were to be done, then the accessibility to that 1A I would think would have to be, Riverside Drive would have to be extended somehow at the end of the cul-de-sac to reach that lot. I think that would be a bit concerning, you know, to the neighbors and the wildlife corridor, but the positive is I see a tremendous opportunity here. Now, the opportunity to me, and I could be wrong, but I think the real value is the upper lots. If the city could work with Mr. Myers, the developer, and see this opportunity and work together cooperatively with the land trust and the community to maybe give credits for the upper development, make it easier to do those type of things. And in order to work out a deal where the lower portion, which would be 1A, would then be annexed into the Howard Preserve. And hey, maybe call it the Myers Legacy Annex, you know, something of that nature. I'm sure that there could be maybe an appraised value, a current market analysis done at an appraised value, where if we could get different organizations together, you know, maybe there could be some financial benefit to of course, Mr. Myers' needs, but also what better way to serve the public benefit? To work together to that lower portion of 1A, I believe what I've read is the intent has always been to work with the land trust to obtain that piece of property, to make you know, of course, the accessibility would be a positive thing to have that maintained. So I just see that as an opportunity if we look a little further, think about tomorrow rather than just today. You know, how can we get these people together to say, well, let's work with them up here. What can you do for me down here? My thoughts, so. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, we do have one on Zoom. Doro Chanela.
Hi, Doro Chanela, 1217 Glen Aspen Drive. I live south of Riverside, and I frequent the Howard Preserve at least 3 or 4 times a week. Yesterday, I was there and I talked to 6 fishermen who were parked at the cul-de-sac, and I told them about this meeting and what was going on. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody's going to show up, either Zooming or in person, but people really want to see the Howard family's legacy extended to that cul-de-sac. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity right now, and to work with other organizations or the Land Trust. Mike Howard was so well spoken just now about his family, and yes, I think it would be a wonderful legacy to name something down there, the Judy and Keith Myers legacy or something, to give them credit for wanting to better the easement access from the south end into the preserve. I read the Wood River Land Trust letter dated February 26 to P&Z. I concur wholeheartedly with their message. I believe that the fisherman's easement does need to be extended the entire length or the entire western border to Lot A, or the east of the current in the water, very unsafe, hazardous easement. We can't get to the Howard Preserve from the south end legally through the water. It's dangerous. In the summer, that place is mobbed with families and kids. At the last pole that's possible to get to before you go on to Keith's property and get to the preserve itself. I saw a photograph that they had calling it the middle of the proposed Lot 1A facing west. And that is not possible for us to walk legally along the water or in the water to get to the preserve. So the code does mention that we should have an unaltered riparian easement along that section, and I would think it would be in everyone's best interest if the commission reviewed that again and saw the huge benefit to the community to have that part of the plat note, which would mean that the current plat note 8 would need to be deleted and a new one added. So I just really hope that we can work it out and somehow get that Lot 1A too. But if not, it would be great to have a new fisherman's easement that is safe without hazards. And that's it. So thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. Anyone else here tonight want to? Yes.
If I may, Tom Blanchard, 33 Lower Broadford Road. And I read the minutes, and I'm kind of curious because there were a number of public comments that I thought were on point, and none of them are mentioned in the minutes. So the community that reads the minutes and tries to understand what may have happened in the meeting has no idea what the public concern might be. And I think a lot of the issues we're talking about today and will be talking about as this moves forward are ones that were raised by the public. And I would, hope maybe the P and Z would review their decision not to, in any way summarize, even very shortly, the public comments that were made. Now I'll give you more public comment. I did want to mention something about the power lines. I went down and looked at it, and the applicant is talking about the transmission line, but there are really two different type of lines down there. There's a distribution line, which are the poles inside the block corridor. The transmission lines are the two big ones that are on the outside, and the transmission lines run from one block all the way to another with two poles over each on the end. It's the distribution lines inside that are the implement to, or the impediment to really develop that property in terms of the use that it's going to get if we're going to see development on the west side of the alleyway there. And I would hope that someone investigates the difference between those two and how Idaho Power treats those two. I do know in the past, if Idaho Power had placed their poles inside the city's right of way, in fact was trespassing, maybe even with permission of the city to do so, if they had to move them for some purpose, Idaho Power had to pay for that. And that was the case years ago, and I'm not sure if that's the case now or not, but I think those distribution lines are gonna be a lot cheaper to handle than the transmission lines. I was curious too about the issue about the streets and the alleys. It seems to me that if we're gonna call it a street and use the street definitions, the terms to accept it as a street says it in fact has to be accepted. And I don't see anything in the proceedings here that discusses the necessity for the city to accept that alleyway now as a non-conforming street, and I think we need to address that, should address that right now. Again, why emergency access was raised in the public comments, I saw no comments about it in the staff report afterwards or anything associated with it, but I do know in discussions with the fire chief, he thought, given what he understood was occurring, was that emergency access down there for fire purposes is critical to his department, and I'm sure it's probably true for law enforcement also. So delivering medical services, delivering fire services, delivering, let's say, law enforcement services down there, I think are pretty essential. And we can't do that without some kind of an easement down there. And that brings me to another point, and that is the spoken intent has been to find a way to do exactly what Mike Howard has suggested and find a way to purchase this property for the city. And in the hearings in front of the city council that led to the approval of the first property lines, I think everyone agreed that the city really should control that property down there. But if we want to get an honest evaluation of its value to compensate the owners for that transfer, we need to have a lot down there, because they can't appraise a piece of property for value if it has no building value or use value. And so we agreed, the city council agreed, that in fact we would have a lot down there and it was based on the idea that it would enhance or allow the transfer of that property. And I think that's something to keep in mind as you deliberate down there. And the point afterwards, once that is done, there's no guarantee that what Mike has suggested is going to happen, and the lot will go on the market. And if the market responds and buys it at a price that's prohibitive for the city to respond to, you will not have any access to that. And I guarantee you, if you have a fire down there in the right condition, you've got woodlands both up on the canal side and on the river side that will move that fire in any direction the wind tends to be blowing. So I think some kind of emergency access down there needs to be developed. And the final point that I wanted to talk about was the question was raised here at the P and Z level is, what does financial hardship mean? And I was nervous about that response, and I requested that we look into that to some degree. And I think if you Google it and look at what legislation has done in other communities, it defines the fact that the hardship has to be associated with the land and cannot be associated with the cost of the cost to the owner of that land. That is a relevant condition. If it costs X, that's what it costs, but it's not a hardship issue. A hardship issue would be where if you were to move those poles 5 feet and it put it into the river or it put it down to an ravine or in a hillside that in fact made it impossible for that system to operate, that's a physical hardship associated with the land and would allow you to say, no, we shouldn't move it. The applicant is appealing to you to say that it's too expensive. That's an irrelevant issue, I think, legally, in terms of determining a hardship for there, and I'd like to see some greater articulation of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Something looks full onto Main Street, Bellevue. I'd just like to second everything that Tom has just stated. Being involved in the housing, working on many issues over the years. I think he articulated it very well. So I hope you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, Amy Trujillo, I'm with the Wood River Land Trust, and I agree, I think we have been talking about the Myers for a long time about what this property could mean for the Howard Preserve, and I think we'd love to keep talking with the city and the landowners about it. I do think that what's in front of you right now is an opportunity to make sure that we can have secure, safe access to the preserve, even if something else happens with that lot. I know that CC Osborne prepared our comment letter about the fisherman's access. I don't know if you want to say anything now.
Sure, I'll just reiterate what our initial letter said for the meeting on February 18th and what we focused on in the second letter. So in the first letter, we presented these either two routes to go forward with improving public access through this entitlement process. One being potentially through an exchange of like waivers and benefits that would be discretionary in between the applicant and the city and could involve deeding the lot 1A, as some others have commented. But second and separately from that, there is a provision in code in the easement section that the commission might consider enforcing to extend the fisherman access easement to connect to the other rights of way north and south of that block. We think an enforcement of that would be appropriate given where the floodway is and where the ordinary high water mark is and how much of the unnamed street and public access to Howard Preserve is often obstructed by that floodway. As Doro said in the last meeting, you can't walk underwater. So everyone loves this preserve dearly, and we just hope that the commission in deliberating this plat will prioritize that public access to the southern end.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Florence Blanchard, 33 Lower Rockford Road, Friends of the Howard Preserve. Over time, I've talked to Mr. Myers and particularly Mr. Kewen, and he has assured me a number of times, we want this property below the bench to belong to the Howard Preserve. So what I'm hoping here, that there can be, taking in all the points that people have made, there can be some reconciliation of these points. And that is what the result is, that the property becomes part of the Howard Preserve.
Thank you. Anybody else? Saw some movement? Yeah.
I'm Carrie Wesson. I'm in 500 South Main. I'm in the pink house with the chicken coop. And I understand that as much as I love it, it was part of the original homestead. It was built in 1920 and it's kind of iconic, but I understand that it's on city property and if you have to do things to it, it'll make me very sad. But that also being said, you're talking about moving the road up there, or improving the road up there and moving it 5 feet closer to all the houses. And 5 feet isn't much, but if you start talking about moving the power lines are gonna start going right over some of those homes, including mine. And then you're moving the road even closer to my house, my property value goes down, or the closer that dirty, dusty road gets to my house. So I'm also asking the city that I understand they have certain demands on Mr. Myers to replat this land. But, if you can also look at the alleyway, does it need to be 2 lanes? Does it need to be, you know, does it need to have pavement? Does it need to have all those things? Is it okay? It's just the alleyway that it is right now, and maybe throw some gravel mix on it or something like that. But I, you know, that, other than that, I would love any of that area to be part of the preserve. And I think the city would be wise to invest in that. Because if it goes up for sale, you don't know what's gonna be built there. So I hope they'll consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, Jim Kewen, 2114 Buttercup, actually. It's not, we're not really, Keith isn't trying to develop anything, it's a lot line shift. There's 6 lots that could be sold, just like any other city lot there is in Bellevue down there. And we're trying to create 3 of them. And of the 3, only 2 of them would be, conveyed to private ownership. That's what we're looking for, and it has a street on both sides of it. So, I see that, we've been, like I said in the last meeting, Keith's been not only working hard, but writing pretty substantial checks to try to make the possibility of creating an independent lot down below in 1A, so that moving forward, what his vision and what I believe the citizens of Bellevue, and I hope you see their vision and planning going forward, is that they would like to see the Howard Preserve connect down to Riverview. If we don't do this, and just sell 1 lot, 2 lots, 3 lots, 4 lots, 5 lots, 6 lots, combine 2, combine 3, doesn't make any difference. There's a potential to have multiple owners own property going down through that, and we're making it impossible to have that separate lot will create a situation where it will never be possible to have the Howard Preserve go down through there. So, and I understand that, you know, you can't make your decisions for financial hardship to benefit a developer. That doesn't make any sense. I make my living doing that, and that doesn't make any sense. But on the other hand, making it so difficult that he can't do it, in some places, that might make sense. Here, there are some lots that he can move ahead and still sell them, but it certainly will be a result that he's not happy with, and I don't believe that the city of Bellevue will be happy with. So somehow, I think that, you know, Keith pretty much built and maintained that, you call it an alley, it was a road for him. You know, that he's brought in heavy equipment as an excavator, a semi with a 40-foot trailer. In and out of that, he maintained the alley, put the gravel in the alley, and currently he plowed it while he owned it. And I think that the 2 tenants on both ends of it are taking care of maintaining. I don't think Casey, I don't think Casey's been working on it. I don't think the city of Bellevue does much on that road, if anything. So, I hope that vision that Keith has is a vision that you have as a committee. And find a path forward so that the city of Bellevue and the citizens of the valley can find a way so we can have that Howard Preserve extended down to Riverview. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else tonight? Okay. Going once, twice. Public comment is closed. Okay. So Brian, we've got a big packet in front of us, and I feel like it's taken us kind of 2 meetings just to go through like staff report, applicant report, and all the public comment now. Do you mind guiding us really quick on how we should approach now the actual factors that we're deciding on? I think we know the, you know, just a review of the conditions actually that are being requested and maybe how we approach that conversation.
Yeah, I'm just happy to get in that. I think the next procedural steps would be for the applicant to have an opportunity to rebut any of the public comment that has been received. And then you can ask me any questions, and I will be at that time to kind of go through the conditions of approval and what required findings you need to make.
Okay, great. So let's start with that. Sam, do you have any rebuttals there?
Yes, Samantha Stalnaker with Local Engineering. I'll try and kind of summarize our responses in an orderly fashion if possible. The way I kind of foresee we keep moving forward is one of two scenarios. One would be what's, currently existing, right? We have 6 town site lots in the city of Bellevue that are saleable. And I think that that would be an unfortunate outcome of this whole process, but it's certainly possible. It would create private property all the way down past where a significant number of foot traffic occurs today. And I think that it would be detrimental to future connectivity of the Howard River. The alternative, and what we're hoping we can come to resolution on here today is what's before you. And I just wanted to summarize the proposed road improvements that we would like to proceed with. And these are road improvements that I believe the fire department is comfortable with. What we would like to do is construct officially and formally a 20-foot wide gravel road that is off center somewhere between 3 and 5 feet in the alley, shifted to the west so that we provide separation from those existing power poles. And yes, there are transmission and distribution lines, but there are poles in the same location for distribution line only poles and distribution and transmission line poles. So all of those poles would have to get relocated. Again, Idaho Power did just a very broad look at that cost of $100,000 to $200,000. If that cost were a requirement, if the, planning and zoning commission decided that they felt those transmission lines and distribution lines needed to be shifted east, I think that that would probably end all discussion about the scenario we hope will move forward. So those are the road improvements that we're hoping to proceed with. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, let's see, since we're talking about the alley, has the city accepted the alley? The alley is not proposed to be dedicated, it's city property currently, it's a right of way. So we're not proposing any dedication that the city would have to accept, we've already accepted it. And then in terms of, emergency access, I'm not entirely sure that I understand the concerns currently for the property. If there were an issue on the property, the emergency services would absolutely have the ability to access the property. And I don't foresee any issues in an emergency situation where there's a wildfire, where there would be prohibited access on this property. In terms of pedestrian access on, along the river, we did try to provide photos of what it happens currently, and there's a couple different footpaths. One, I think, does largely follow the 20-foot kind of fisherman's access easement that we're proposing to dedicate on the plat. And I think that I want to clarify the comments about walking in the water versus out of the water. While yes, some of this property is inundated during flooding conditions, I think that it should be considered that maybe it's unsafe to access the property and the trail system in those conditions. Under normal flow conditions, when water is at or below the mean high water, which is a normal average time of the year, there is dry land within 20 feet of that ordinary high water mark that's accessible for foot traffic. So again, the reasons I don't think we should allow or require additional easements along the western portion of this property is because it's going to be nearly impossible to enforce whether or not people are actually using that easement or if they're trespassing. Without a defined path that's constructed, it's going to be impossible for us to kind of keep track of where people are going and if they're in that easement that's really not marked, or if they're trespassing. So in closing, I think that we're kind of at a breaking point where like, is this plat financially feasible for Judy and Keith, or does it make more sense just to stay where it is? And I think with the road improvements that we've proposed, including some waivers to the standards, we feel that it's financially feasible to move forward. This is something that the Myers really want to do. They want to provide an opportunity for the Howard Preserve to continue. But if that's not something that the city is comfortable with in terms of the alley improvements that we're proposing, then I think that they'll make a decision about whether or not that's something they can move forward with financially. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have as you review, and we'll look forward to.
Any more questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
You guys have any questions for me at this time, or should
Um, I had a question on something actually Samantha provided in the last packet. I just want a little clarification. So section 10-2-1. On a corner lot, only one street property line should be considered the front lot line, and the shorter street frontage shall be considered the front lot line unless determined otherwise by the administrator. So would that mean that technically Chestnut and Walnut would be the fronts of the property?
I? As they're currently laid out, you're correct that Chestnut and Walnut would be the front property line, otherwise, unless I, being a very wise and intelligent administrator, said there's no street there in the alleyway street combo here would function as the front property line. The proposed lot lines would make the street frontage along the alleyway longer than the frontage along Walnut or Chestnut. So those would then definitely be front property lines.
And if that's the case, does it need to go, can the alley stay as an alley, or does it need to be improved upon?
That definition has nothing to do with the alley versus street conversation. The item in question is 11.4.8. B, all streets shall be constructed to meet or exceed the criteria and standards set forth in city standard specifications for streets and water and all other applicable ordinances, resolutions, or regulations of the city or any other governmental entity having jurisdiction thereover, now existing or hereafter adopted, amended, or codified. And so we have an adopted street section for a 50-foot right of way. The proposed quotes that matches this, that shows, I believe 22 feet of asphalt, not gravel asphalt, power lines, ideally undergrounded, but otherwise adjacent and set back, as I don't recall a specific number, but, engineering judgment would allow.
Questions for Brian? Yet. For now?
Okay.
Okay.
So in order to, approve this application, you must affirmatively find that it meets the procedure section of the lot line adjustment chapter and, which references the waiver section of the subdivision chapter. Both of which are, in the staff report under required code findings. I am happy to read them out if you guys would like to do so, or you can take a second and, read quietly to yourself. Okay, and then, at this point, staff's recommending approval with the following conditions. Number one, no building shall encroach into the space between top of the eastern bank, elevation of the street or alley of the canal and east high water mark of the canal unless otherwise allowed per division 45 right-of-way agreement. This agreement shall be recorded prior to the final plat recordation. This is modified from the previous approval, based on information provided to the applicant and the canal district. Number two, prior to the issuance of a building permit for the proposed parcel identified on the submitted preliminary plat as lot 1A, the applicant shall receive approval from the city and construct a suitable vehicular and pedestrian access to the property. Number three, prior to the submittal of a final plat application, the applicant shall provide a revised preliminary plat identifying building envelopes for all corner lots in accordance with Bellevue City Code, section 1146C. Number four, prior to the submittal of a final plat application, the applicant shall construct all required improvements, including improved roadway within right of way to the east of the subject property from Walnut Street to Chestnut Street to city standards in accordance with Bellevue City Code section 1148B. Number five, prior to the submittal of a final plat application, the applicant shall submit a revised preliminary plat identifying an easement for the Bellevue Canal District and documentation that the proposed easement has been reviewed and accepted by the Bellevue Canal District. Number six, prior to submittal of a final plat application, the applicant shall submit a revised preliminary plat identifying the ordinary high water mark and a 20-foot wide fisherman's easement along the landward side of the ordinary high water mark. Number seven, no construction or grading shall occur until the Bellevue City engineer has reviewed and approved the construction drawings.
And these were as drafted, not including, and we're about to discuss their revised conditions, though, right?
There are revised conditions.
Or those reflect-
Where I recommended modification, which was only on condition number one, have been incorporated into this list.
Mhm.
The other revised conditions, were number three regarding, building envelopes on corner lots, and number four, which is construction of, or the roadway to city standards, between Walnut and Chestnut.
So I'm sorry, these drafted ones, I'm just trying to understand.
These have been drafted by me.
Okay,
Based on
but we
analysis.
still have to discuss those,
Yes.
their request for changing those
Correct.
conditions.
You make
Okay,
a
thank you.
recommendation based of these conditions or modifications to those conditions to the city council.
Thank you. So would you recommend best approach would be to go through each condition as they are and then reflect upon the applicant's adjustments or proposed adjustments? Okay,
And if it expedites it, I believe, number four is the only one that is really in contention at this point in time.
I agree with staff's direction on the first couple of conditions, and I think number four and the easement is all I have discussed in particular.
I would ask if we're going kind of in order first on just number two, when the applicant brought up the vehicular and pedestrian access. Do we feel like this is something that the applicant is gonna have to do work to obtain suitable vehicular access, or is it already kind of there?
No, lot 1A is the one on the far west that, is all below the bench.
Mhm.
There is not currently any, suitable vehicular access to it. The nearest one is the terminus of Riverside Drive that is a little ways away. This is also reflected in plat note number 10 in very small font on the plat. That says, no building shall be constructed on lot 1A until a time when an approved access to the lot is developed. So
Oh.
should the applicant, sell this to a private party for some, theoretically for development purposes, the purchaser would have to sign a document when they close their on the property, acknowledging that they have reviewed plat and signed it and, know what they're getting into.
Okay, thanks. I think that big words that I was missing on that was building permit, so, thank you. Hmm. Um, So then just regarding number 3 for the building envelopes, just based on the applicant's package that we saw at the last meeting, I thought there was a bit more discussion to have on identifying where the corners are.
They've identified where the corners are. The question was, are these corner lots?
Mhm.
At this point, they would not be because there is not a developed street extending past the front property line. But there is also nothing precluding being extended, should somebody want
In
to
the
invest a
future.
lot of money
I see.
into a bridge.
Okay.
But so until they're definitely not going to be corner lots, we're going to treat them as corner lots in my opinion.
So then the wider building envelope in this condition as it's written would apply.
The building, they would have to identify building envelopes, which do not include a radius from the intersections of Chestnut and Walnut to the alleyway, and then 75 feet off of that, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Could be less of a setback though, but wasn't considered a corner lot, and
Right,
we're
that would be
calling it a
zero
corner lot
setback.
right now.
Yeah.
And this is up for discussion now.
Any of the conditions?
Okay, thank you. Thoughts on number 3 then? I feel like you mentioned you were fine with 1 through 3, but
Yeah, I agree with staff.
I guess in reading it, and someone clarify if you think I'm reading this the wrong way. I was kind of I guess the opposite interpretation of the staff condition on there, thinking that, I mean, generally, the larger offset for the building envelope on a corner lot would be for clearance issues, right, for visibility. I don't really see that being a problem on this sort of property, as far as vehicular access around the corners and stuff, so I was leaning more to not imposing that corner lot on the building envelope.
Condition.
Yeah,
I'm inclined to agree with that. I think I can see both sides of it, definitely, that, taking into account the owner or developer's intent is, I think, worth considering, but with plat notes and, and conditions, we have to take into account what could happen in the future. So I can see both sides of it. I think the way it sits currently, it does not, it doesn't function as a corner lot. And I think, to me, the balance would fall towards, like, I don't see it functioning as being functionally a corner lot in the future. So I'm inclined to not make that condition something that we apply to this.
Yeah, and I mean, I do agree with staff's interpretation of the code. But it is true that there is a very small area that probably would be able to be developed, so. Possibly letting the building envelope encroach into that 75. I could be okay with.
No, I don't ever see it becoming a corner lot.
Right, and even if technically it does, that portion, that extension of, of Chestnut is is not going to be a through street. So
It would only service that property.
the traffic pattern, you know, even if that street were to get extended, that traffic pattern would be functionally not, you know, a street corner.
Mhm.
I think maybe we're all agreeing to remove that condition as written.
Just so that I can effectively make findings to that effect. Would you be granting a waiver based on 11.3.1 of the code? And if so. I think you would be prudent to explain. I mean, you have explained, but in relation to how the code is.
So it was 11.3.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think
the
that
waiver
would help
section, so we can throw them out there.
Work through it
Yeah.
and analyze, is there special physical characteristics about the property? That are unique. Creating undue hardship.
I could take a stab at that. I would propose that we waive the requirement for the building envelope to reflect a corner lot because the nature of the streets at this location creates a condition where these lots will not function as corner lots. That's a rough draft.
Rough draft. We're like, okay, let's build.
It's not gonna become a public thoroughfare.
Sure. Yeah, through traffic at that
Mhm.
corner.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, does this even need to be a waiver then, Brian? If you're not finding that that is a corner lot. Then that radius doesn't really apply, does it?
I'm thinking the same with the argument. Or, you know, with the staff report and the information in there, if we really wanna make that assessment on whether we're defining corner lots and streets and alleys, or if we just choose now to set it as a waiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you find that. Development of. Or furtherance of the Chestnut Walnut Streets is. Very nearly impossible, then it is not a corner lot.
Okay.
Good thought exercise.
Yeah. So I think we're going with the waiver though, is that, or not, it doesn't matter, you're thinking
You
it doesn't
guys
matter,
are the commission.
I think I'd rather just hit
I
on the
think it's
waiver.
easier if you
Yeah.
guys find that it doesn't apply really,
Okay.
because then there's a whole other analysis that you have to do under the waiver.
Okay. So we just strike condition 3.
Correct.
Cool.
Next biggie, number 4. The roadway. Jill, I think you had some thoughts.
I definitely have some heartburn about this one. I did find a definition of undue hardship in the zoning code, 10-2-1. Which states special conditions depriving the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other property owners in the same district under the terms of this title. But not nearly a matter of convenience and profit. And I feel like to. Actually grant this waiver, I don't find that there are special characteristics affecting the property. It seems like the cost of the development is the main issue. Pointing towards undue hardship. And I think if we were to rely on the codified definition of undue hardship, the applicant does have rights commonly enjoyed by other property owners. And the matter of moving the poles does seem to fall under the convenience and profit, which shall not be included in undue hardship. And thinking of long-term, if something is developed on that street, to have a gravel street in a business zone where it sounds like maybe there has been some heavy machinery usage and that hasn't necessarily caused an issue, but I'm just thinking of, if there's a workshop there in the future, to have a substandard street with gravel might not be the best direction for long-term usage of those lots as they possibly become developed.
Definitely something I thought about similarly when I first read the application, right? I was like, if someone was gonna build, but I'm also kind of assessing, I mean, I remember asking from the last meeting whether there was an intent for development on these lots, and not currently. I think they're just planned for sale. And then looking at the photos, since we haven't been to the site, I was like, what can you build on this space? A little bit like when we're talking about commercial access, possibly. Which we don't need to get too deep into that, of course, but I was like, oh, I mean, would a fully improved right of way or a street even be necessary? Because what could go here?
Well, I think what the plan or the hope is for the developer is to build, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to build additional retention on the
Oh.
canal side and extend the flat buildable area towards the canal.
Nice.
With some concrete retention closer to the canal. Is that correct?
That's possible, certainly.
And that's all been discussed, right, with the irrigation district, right?
Yeah,
That
so
was
the
all.
canal company is aware of that. They gave us the dimensions that were required for setback from the high water mark. For any of those structures, so that's embedded in the canal maintenance agreement, the canal setback agreement.
So the way I'm processing this is that the property owners to the east. My impression is, or would generally prefer to not have the poles moved closer to their property. So in granting the offset of the street, to me, it seems like we're doing what would be beneficial to the applicant and to their neighbors across the alley. I don't see who is being harmed by granting the offset. And I'm up for hearing if I'm missing something there, but I just don't know what the downside is to leaving the poles where they are and allowing the roadway improvements to be offset.
What would be the special physical characteristics to allow for that? For this waiver?
Proximity of the poles to the neighbors on the east. To existing development. If anyone's being harmed on it, it would be the future buyers of lot 2A and lot 3A, because they'll have 3 to 5 less depth of the lot to build on. But I mean, that'll just gets, factored into what the market price of the lot ends up being.
Did you verify how that location of the roadway would impact their buildable area? Not quite sure.
So. If,
Rose roadway either way would be city right.
I suppose that's true, that's true.
So to not grant the waiver, they'd have to they'd have to move the poles. Is that, I'm just clarifying, like if what the circumstances are.
That's direction to make sure that there's, travel lanes wide enough.
Mhm.
Although I am still unsure with, the communication by. Idaho Power.
There's a lot of photos and the right one. Yeah,
Where,
just trying to clarify, like exactly, if there was no waiver, what has to happen?
yeah, from the email included by Sam in her packet, on February 13th. The communication from Darren, was saying that. There's no specific distance for vehicles traveling next to our poles. We just have guidance from the NESC code section 231B1, which is sufficient distance, obviously up to interpretation. So B2, where there are no curbs, would curbs be required for this improvement? So where there are no curbs, supporting structures, support arms, anchor guys, braces, and equipment attached to there too should be located a sufficient distance from the roadway to avoid contact by ordinary vehicles. So I don't think there's any codified distance, but there's best practice to make sure there's sufficient distance for travel.
Which I think the applicant was saying that.
Yeah.
They would interpret that as 5 feet.
Yeah.
As a
edge
safe
of asphalt.
distance.
Yeah.
And it would require asphalt finishing.
The road, the approved city standard is asphalt.
At 22 feet.
22 feet of it.
I was just trying to clarify the point about the poles, just when we were looking at the waiver saying not just detrimental to. The undue hardship and detrimental to public welfare, nor injurious to the other property owners in the immediate area, and I was taking point of the public comment of, one of the neighbors saying like if the poles were moved, that they would be closer to their properties and then affecting their own, property rights and development.
Yeah.
So I think that gives a reason to allow a waiver to not have to move those. Am I on the right path there possibly?
Would we be creating undue hardships for
Other property owners
lots along block 24?
by not allowing a waiver? Yeah.
And the alternative to all of this is that the power lines are undergrounded, which as discussed is extremely
Undergrounded.
expensive, but that is. The solution that would fix everything.
Okay, so you're thinking like a bit of a stretch on the injurious thing?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, the most likely configuration of the development of those lots would be. Similar to lot 24, that is Manny Construction's office and the view above it, where the structure is up to the front of the lot, fronting, Main Street. And then there'd be parking, landscaping, etc. at the back.
Mhm.
People can configure how they would like, but that would be the most logical kind of retail configuration, in my opinion.
I do think a big part of the conversation does have to do with financial burden, which based on the definitions we've all heard, right, should be the primary argument when it comes to undue hardship. So I was just trying to consider how other property owners would be affected by it. And then also considering, even though I don't think it falls into the argument of the waivers, right, is, improvements that we all want to see within Bellevue, of course, and on lots, especially in the business zone. But I'm not sure that argument helps us with the waiver, conversation, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If we're considering the waiver, then how does it meet criteria?
Mhm.
Is there a reason that asphalt road couldn't be off center?
And yeah,
I mean, it certainly is possible. I will say that the distance between the two power poles on the south side of the alley is quite constricted. It's about 26 feet, which is the full standard road section width with the 22-foot asphalt section and 2-foot gravel shoulders on either side. To be perfectly honest, I mean, you can require asphalt. I think that, you know, we all know that there's no asphalt on Walnut or Chestnut. And I think that in this particular case, it would probably be cost prohibitive. But that's certainly something you can choose to require. I think it may probably, cause this project to stall out and remain as is, but.
powerful question. Photo number 4.
Oh, thanks. Oh, right on the borders. Image. But it's all of these, right, that were being estimated to be moved, the ones on the, east side.
The challenge with the 2 power poles on the south end is turning radius and that sort of thing.
Did fire chief comment on those turning radiuses?
No,
I didn't remember seeing anything from him, but
there was
That
a comment
seems
from the fire chief, nothing really substantial.
Mhm.
I did speak to him, last week sometime, regarding emergency access into the Howard Preserve. He was comfortable with the plat as proposed.
If it's helpful for turning radiuses, the fire department does require just turning onto a 20-foot wide path, so theoretically you could, you know. Fit a 20-foot wide path and then make those turning radiuses work. with the departments.
Here, I'm seeing a way out of this one. Um, Brian, do you mind giving me just a brief overview again of like, what the code requires versus what the applicant feels is they're able to do based on financial constraints or proposals? Like, what's the difference?
As far as
Just a quick summary. I know we've talked about it at the last meeting, but,
Street design,
okay.
that, what you're after?
Yeah,
Street
like tell,
standards,
like
yeah.
what Bellevue would require versus what's being
Yeah,
proposed.
the required is.
There's an
there's
exhibit.
an exhibit.
Oh, great.
Maybe helpful for myself.
I think I looked at that last
Um,
time.
22 foot paved asphalt, way offset from power poles. It says plus or minus 6 feet, I believe, on the city standard, drainage swales on either side. um, Roadway centered in the right of way. The request is offset the roadway in the right of way, 20 feet of gravel. Instead of having it drain to both sides, draining just to one side, so there's only a drainage swale on the west side of the roadway.
20 feet instead of 22 feet,
Yes.
what I said.
26 total with shoulders for the standard.
But the request is to go to 20. Thanks.
Yeah.
I can't read these like you do. It's very tiny. Standard is 26 with shoulder, but the proposal is 20. And there was something about a slight moving off of center.
Yeah, so. Yeah, to accommodate sufficient distance to Idaho power poles, it would be offset to the west.
But Idaho Power doesn't require a specific distance from poles.
Right.
It's a reasonableness
Yeah,
assessment.
I would say, I would assume that snowplow operations would factor into that and they err on the side of caution.
What snowplow operation?
Somebody's snow wagon.
I'm just kidding. And what was the move off of center?
5 feet is proposed.
5 feet, the same distance we're trying to get away from the poles. Something there. I agree, it's reasonable to be away from the poles. I'm wondering if that fiber is the difference, and if the only thing we would really be moving on then is the width.
But still maintaining the asphalt, maintaining some amount of city standard.
That seems a little unreasonable to me, but I don't know if there's a space in the waiver. I mean, just based on the areas of Chestnut and Walnut around it not being paved. It sounds quite luxurious, though.
Could existing conditions of other roads around qualify as physical characteristics or conditions?
I like that.
I mean, is it special? There's a lot of Bellevue that is not,
Special.
yeah, not up to city standards.
Do we have development impact fees for streets?
We do.
I kept wondering if there was something like if the city ever chooses to put asphalt on those two streets around, that you could then require it to also be asphalted, but. It's a pretty big requirement.
That's a pretty big requirement, a
That's
pretty
pretty
big
big, yeah.
challenge to track down, whatever property owner.
Mhm.
Extracting that from whoever it gets sold to is
Right.
I agree, there's something, the special characteristics on the surrounding streets there, not being asphalted as well. Okay, if I was gonna play with a condition here. I'm just wondering if we just move then, if we're able to, like, come up with the portion of the waiver, if it's just about changing the width of the required street, then also a special waiver for this property that could allow it to be less wide or more narrow. So then it can accommodate the space there, and maybe that's the only piece that we have to waiver on. Does that make sense?
So it would be a 20 foot offset roadway. Overhead power poles can remain as is. You need to have one angle, I forget the technical
The
terms,
shed.
shed drainage instead of crown.
Yeah, I think this, and the special characteristic being for the waiver being the existing poles that are there, but I understand the point, like, in moving them, then you're considering just a financial burden, but that means you can't do anything with the property. It means no one can do anything with the
Mhm.
property.
Right.
So I know it's not supposed to be the biggest part, but it is a piece. Said not specifically for this applicant, but likely anybody on this lot,
Right.
on these lots.
Where do you draw the line between, just simply reducing the profit of the developer versus making the project financially not feasible?
Mhm.
Like, or cost prohibitive versus just reducing the profit of the developer?
Yeah,
Is that a worthwhile or valid distinction to make?
Well, I think sometimes hardship is defined as an inability to make reasonable use of the land,
Right.
and so.
that's helpful. I think for these particular lots, I think that phrase on undue hardship is really applicable here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just for the types of projects or the owners or the types of projects that would go on these properties. Having to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in road improvements
You'd go
is
elsewhere.
unreasonable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
nobody would do it.
Yeah. And it's not I don't see this as a situation where harm is being done to anyone by the proposed condition.
Yeah, I don't
I
think
agree
that's
with
a
you.
question. It definitely needs that portion of it.
Yeah. Brian, have we thought of enough things to try to make a waiver out of this? I feel like the width might be where I was going. I'm not sure if other people have something on there, like a waiver on the width requirement for coated street improvements.
I would be inclined to waive the asphalt requirement also.
Oh, right.
I mean,
I would agree with you
if
there.
existing city streets that access it are not paved, I
Mhm.
think that's a physical characteristic or condition. That makes paving that alley an undue hardship.
Access roads to the alley are also in. Yeah.
Mhm. Gravel.
Mhm.
And I think speaking of the waiver requirements, that I think the width requirement could affect. Adjacent property owners. Also. Just picking apart at that. More reasons. For a waiver.
So we would
So we're
strike condition 4.
Is it,
Or would
is
we
it
amend
striking
it?
it or is
No,
it,
we
yeah,
would, we would amend it.
Yeah,
Shall, applicant shall construct all required improvements. Including improving the roadway within the right of way to the east of subject property from Walnut to Chestnut. In accordance with with applicants' proposed. Roadway improvements.
something like that. Was there enough there?
They have a condition of approval suggested to that effect.
Um,
I'll pretty much agree on that one.
yeah, I don't think that width is necessary, and I don't think asphalt is necessary. That's my.
Brian, do you have enough
Good
direction
use.
on that? Yes, okay. I would like to discuss the easement in
Yeah.
lot 1A.
For sure.
I think we got it for sure.
Yeah, due to the extra pictures collected, it does seem like there is an existing path, at least, as is now, that runs basically down the middle of lot 1A. So looking at 11-4-10, the easements, C. The easement, the 20-foot fisherman access easement is a minimum standard. And it does seem like we have a decent amount. Let's see, these easement requirements are minimum standards, and in appropriate cases where a subdivision abuts a portion of the river adjacent to an existing pedestrian easement. The council, so I don't think we can recommend this, but we can recommend to council, obviously, we require an extension of that easement along the portion of the riverbank which runs through the proposed subdivision. And I guess where I'm getting at that is, it does sound like lot 1A is, the intention of it was to eventually become part of Howard. But certainly as it's being created, there's no guarantee that that could happen. So I definitely have concerns. And then, depending on the price, is it financially feasible for the city or would the land trust to purchase it? Who knows? There's always a possibility of an outside person purchasing this. Whether they want to develop it or not, but if they own the property, they could feasibly put a fence around their property line. So I don't know if this would be an actual addition or just changing the plat note that's proposed, plat note A, or how that would look around, but I would propose at least extending the fisherman easement to the southwest corner to at least maintain some perpetuity of access. Rooted in 11-4-10-C, but it appears that there is a decent amount of pathways that already exist in a large portion of that existing lot for the proposed long.
Do we have in one of our materials, a map that kind of shows like where that easement is as a little cloud of color or something? Just in considering what you were mentioning on extending it to the south.
Is like per code, the minimum requirements are 20 feet from the mean high water mark.
Mm-hmm.
So this little area is per plotted what would be allowable.
Okay, but it ends right there.
And that's,
So we're just talking about extending this, so the same 20 feet. But then, I guess it depends where the river goes. this
yeah,
way,
it
actually,
would,
so.
I don't know how to phrase that,
Mm.
if it's based off of main high water mark, I don't know exactly
Alexis,
how
that's
to
the aerial.
actually extend it.
Oh, yeah,
This one?
it ends there, that's the FEMA.
Madam Chairman, if I can ask.
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
clarification question, and maybe provide some
Oh, I see it.
direction.
Thank
So that 20-foot fisherman's access easement is only on lot 1A for the north kind of half of the property.
Mhm.
Then the river kind of diverges from the property and public access is available with the existing right of way. So the city property is adjacent to the west of this property, so there is public access there. I guess I just wanna focus back on that code section 11-4-10. If you read that last sentence, these easement requirements are minimum standards and in appropriate cases where a subdivision abuts a portion of the river adjacent to an existing pedestrian easement. The council may require an extension of that easement along the portion of the riverbank. This doesn't abut any public pedestrian easement. There's public right of way around the perimeter of the property, but we don't abut a platted or recorded public pedestrian easement. Again, I think that, you know, I have a question about liability if you're requiring an additional easement outside of that ordinary high water mark and 20-foot landward of it. Especially within the floodplain along the western boundary of proposed lot 1A. I think that, again, I don't think that this standard applies in this scenario.
Thank you. So it seems to me then the majority of public comment, and I'm not sure if you guys would agree, it has to do with, of course, concern that someday it could become part of Howard Preserve, which is out of our scope and the,
Mhm.
you know. Lost my train of thought there. There was a second piece. I'll get back to it. I was just trying to like hone in on the main issues and if there's something that we feel we can do about, oh, of course. I guess concerns that the 20-foot isn't enough because of water levels in the spring.
Right, seasonal.
Right,
Seasonal
Yeah.
water.
okay,
And general conditions of what exists down there,
Mhm.
that it looks like it's pretty wooded.
Yeah, the wood portions.
It's really. That 20-foot, well, I. Should probably not. Sorry, I'm retracting
Yeah.
my beginning of my.
like you had something good there, so I was
Yeah.
waiting one for it.
So if you go to photo number 1, this is generally the northwestern property corner, looking down, where the fisherman's easement and the high water mark, meet. So the right side of the photo would be the high water mark. You can see that there is, bare ground there. You could theoretically walk there if you were an able-bodied person. The left side is the fisherman's easement area. Again, able-bodied people seem to be walking through that currently. It is pretty thick and wooded. Far as gold, maintaining street health and that sort of thing, it would be preferable to encourage people to walk in the center of the property. Where there's not brushes and things that's sort of shaping, student and so on, but of course that is trespassing and not recommended. So I think the goal would be to find a solution that allows access to the property that does not, inhibit, non-able-bodied persons to use it, and maintain the vegetation's there now. Meeting private property rights of the owner.
And would that be
That's
something
right.
as a plat note or a condition of development or?
So, I mean, the condition of development could be to add a plat note, to add an identified easement on the property. So on, in order to do that, you have to find that it is consistent with city code. And then the Nolan analysis, the visits Is there a nexus to the development application being presented? And is it roughly proportional to the proposal?
And based on some comments, it seems like it's the intention, possibly long-term, of the property owners to sell or donate this to the preserve of the land trust or the city for a purpose of public access, so I'm not sure why we need to consider extending the easement.
I would agree, that the majority of public comment, including from the, property owner himself, is that the long-term goal is to sell it. However, the materials in the record identified as a buildable parcel, it has a building envelope identified on it. I recommend sticking with what materials in front of you are and not relying on intent.
Sure.
Yeah.
Could make sense.
Can they afford it? If they. You know, it could be sold privately
Mhm.
as it exists. There's absolutely no guarantee that it would be transferred.
Would you ever mention the comment regarding that? Yeah, would you be able
The
to?
public comment period is over. However, if you as the commission would like to receive new information from somebody that is not me or Sam or Rick, you may request it.
You okay to hear it or not?
I'm okay to hear it.
Yeah, no objection.
Maybe
Sure.
the
Could you
city-
say your name for the record? again,
Mike
please?
Howard,
Thanks.
Mike Howard. Maybe the city could consider a first right of refusal proposal to the developer. You know, that might be a good idea. Because it is a concern that if it were to, if the intent is as we all state, that might be a way to go.
Okay, thank you. I do agree with the applicant's point that it's, I mean, extension or no extension, it's difficult to enforce. Oh, it's near impossible to enforce. Someone accessing the property down there without any kind of development or owners there. Sounds like possibly people are, you know, outside of the 20 foot as it is, right, and doing it anyway.
Just
so.
occasionally.
Just sometimes, just sometimes.
Would the first right of refusal be a condition or a plat note?
It would be
Yeah, is that feasible?
if the applicant is agreeable to it, we can require whatever we want.
I think the applicant would be agreeable to that as a condition of approval.
For the city of Bellevue to have first right of refusal on purchasing the property.
Can you do Woodward Land Trust, or is that an outside organization, so?
Again, if the applicant is agreeable to it, we can structure that however we want.
Anything anyway.
Would the applicant be agreeable to Woodward Land Trust or?
Would you guys be okay with a 5-minute recess? And I can discuss that with the owner real quick.
For the record, we're in recess. I guess. Never been in recess. always on a leash. Okay, recess is over. Dan,
Thank you, thank you, commissioners, I appreciate the quick recess, so I think that the applicant would be willing to agree to a condition of approval for a first right of refusal for the city or the land trust.
I'm comfortable with adding that information. I'm not sure I'm on the side of extending the easement, just because it seems like people have access as it is, but. Ish, but I know you experience it more. I don't take this path.
So not requiring greater fisherman easement onto the south end
I
of
mean,
the
that's-
property,
I
right?
would prefer that path.
Mhm.
Based on just what we've seen. In the additional.
With this extension. That's what you're meaning, like down to the south end.
Connecting to the southwest end. To absolutely confirm that no matter who buys this plot, that there will always be access.
So what about? And Brian, let me know if this isn't appropriate, but I'm just trying to understand, like, what about this access point? Like, means that they're not walking along the river on, like, where they would be walking along on this north end of the lot? Like, why do they need access within the lot on the south end? And this is just me maybe not understanding the path,
The seasonal high water, is that,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
guess.
reason,
but the river goes this way, is that right?
right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the
It just
FEMA,
Outside of the property boundary. Is public right of way, it was platted in the original Bellevue town site. Obviously never developed into the road, because there's the river running through it. And so that is public access currently. The challenge again is that it is wooded and shrubby. Difficult for the general public to identify as a public access point. But much more obvious, clear, where everybody else is beat down a goat trail is straight through lot 1A.
So,
No, they're taking it already.
yeah, looking at so here's the southern property line at the center. Facing north. So here's a path that's essentially cutting straight through currently.
Oh, okay.
And then here is the northern property line at center facing south. So it looks like there's a path that people are, walking on private property, certainly, but it looks pretty heavily pebbled. Straight through the center. And
Okay,
then if you if you look west of that, it's like, here's the river right here.
thank you guys for clarifying that. I don't think I quite understood that from the photos. So thank you. So if you wanted the easement then to clear that. Kind of treaded on path that people are taking, what does that look like in terms of language?
We would probably want to get that current pathway somewhat surveyed to identify how far or where it's located. I would imagine that it is primarily within the 100-foot riparian area. But it could also, especially when you consider potential improvements to it to widen it to make it ADA accessible and add drainage and that sort of thing, may start encroaching into that already pretty narrow building envelope.
So possible as is that where the path sits wouldn't be able to construct on or near. Without
So the
improvement.
riparian setback area is not the same as an easement, it is the area where you do
No,
you don't
right,
allow construction of buildings and you want to maintain natural landscape, it doesn't permit travel through it.
yeah, I was just trying to understand, like with your language. If you think the path is within the riparian setback, that means we can't construct within it without improvements, right? Is that,
I guess what I'm implying is that it would be, there'd be less development rights harm done.
Okay.
By requiring a pathway easement there. Sounds like, you have a comment?
Yeah, if I can, if here considering an easement through the center of lot one, I would argue that there's a decrease in property value that results. And without strong backing in the code, which I don't think you have, I would consider, I mean, that could be considered a taking. And obviously you have counsel here that can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel that that's appropriate just because there's been people trespassing there consistently. That certainly doesn't protect that as an easement. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
And Madam Chairman, if I may clarify. The land trust is not, requesting that the fisherman's access easement be, expanded to include the current pathway. If you look at the satellite imagery, the current pathway is about 60 feet set in, which is much more than an extension of the proposed fisherman's access easement. So if you were to extend the proposed fisherman's access easement southward, that would only be 20 feet. Of how far in people are walking, right? And we appreciate your deliberation of this extending of the fisherman access easement because having the right of first refusal for the property would be a benefit to the city and the land trust. However, it's not the land trust's preference, and easement is a good backup and insurance that public access can be improved.
And if I can respond to that, I guess if we can look at the aerial imagery and understand what 20 feet along the western frontage of that property looks like, I will caution you, I think that a majority of that is pretty heavily wooded. And having people traverse within that 20-foot offset of the ordinary high water mark is more easily accessible than, or within the right of way for that matter, is more easily accessible than that 20-foot strip on the western portion of the property.
This.
Oh, well, we appreciate everyone's feedback on these issues. We are gonna keep public comment closed, and just restricted to our work with the applicant and with the application package that we have in front of us. Thank you.
So my position would be that from the west edge of lot 1A to that existing goat trail. There's not much benefit to. That's really heavily vegetated. And at the, especially at the south end of lot 1 area. The benefit to an easement on the property is I think very small.
To just do a 20-foot.
To just do the easement, that existing pathway is awesome. And, you know, if that were a future possibility, that would be like, that's the ideal. To hack a path through the vegetation, 20 feet along the property line is, I think, you could just as easily do that just on the other side of the property line. Where that property line runs at the south end of 1A, you've got heavy vegetation on both sides of it. And so whether a pathway went on the city right of way side or on lot 1A side, I think is not a material difference one way or the other, is my impression of what's down there.
So then requesting no adjustment to the condition.
I think the first right of refusal is a good idea. I think we're all on the same, all on the same page here that the goal and the hope is for lot 1A to be transferred to the city or to the land trust. However that might happen. And trying to tack on enlarged easements. It feels to me like a half measure that if lot 1A got sold to a private buyer who wants to build a house on that little building envelope, the easement along the west edge of 1A would be a small benefit. I'm not articulating this very well. Whether that easement is there on the west side or not moves the needle a little bit on access. Lot 1A going to the city or to the land trust versus a private buyer who wants to build a house down there, that's a huge swing in the needle. So to me, the first right of refusal is way more beneficial than trying to wiggle an easement in there. I hope that makes sense.
I'm inclined to agree based on the images. It does look like a 20-foot easement would still be pretty much dead center and some brambles and not inclusive of the existing pathway.
And we don't want to hack that away because then, we lose a bunch of soil retention and runoff into the river is worse if you hack all that vegetation out of there. I mean, that's pretty important for stabilizing soil and riverbank and all that.
What are standard conditions surrounding first rights of refusal? Generally, how long would the Bellevue or Wood River Land Trust have to? Is it a year?
That would be something to, finagle out with the applicant, but. Pretty confident we come to an agreement.
I agree with that. It's not changing the condition, not changing the easement that's on the condition, but adding a rights of refusal.
Good with that.
Okay. I think that was, and then I think we're all comfortable with the remaining conditions. 5, 1, 2, 5, 7. Brian, do you feel like there's anything we've left out in the conversation?
I don't believe so, other than a formal motion and, on the action.
And I think you've included the recommended language there.
Recommended language, I would, modify it I move that we recommend, one of you can say so move once I'm done talking.
Okay.
I move that we recommend LLA 2501 to the Bellevue Common Council for approval with the conditions identified within the staff report as modified in the discussion prior, and to direct staff to prepare findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision documents reflecting this recommendation based on the record provided.
Okay.
So moved.
Oh.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Well done,
I
Chair.
think what's left, everybody, is just a public hearing, so, next regular meeting is scheduled for March 17th. I will not be here, so if everyone make sure you email Brian,
It's a process.
if you will be here. Sorry, we were just, before we adjourned, just talking about the next upcoming meeting. I've already emailed you that I'm not available, and so just reminded everybody to email you that they are coming. And
I think it'll be important that we have full attendance. I don't know if John will be available by then or not. Yeah.
okay, well, I think that's it. So if I can have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
And a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And motion passes, meeting adjourned
Just south of Dick's house.
at 7:29 PM. Oh, thanks, that was,
Gallery is not.
I don't like that. Like never, like never.
Thank you guys.
Nice to see you, Sam.
You know, there are ways to make.
Yeah, I mean, this one was meaty enough as it was. It was meaty enough. And then to add in,
Hey, Brian, do you mind?
everybody wants.
Let's just cut that